I was literally shocked. I have been living in the UK for almost 2 years now, and I genuinely thought I had this place figured out. I really did. I thought the biggest culture shocks were going to be the weather, learning how to queue properly, and figuring out what on earth a Yorkshire pudding is. But here is the truth. The real culture shock isn't the food or the slang, it is the absolute wild realization that things that would literally get you arrested, fined, or thrown face first into the back of a police cruiser in the United States are just casually considered normal, everyday activities in England. I am talking about things that feel so deeply illegal to my American brain that I still look over my shoulder expecting a SWAT team to descend on me when I do them. We need to talk about this because the differences in our laws reveal so much about the deep psychological differences between Americans and Brits. Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine you are standing at a crosswalk in central London. The little pedestrian man on the traffic light is glowing bright red. You stop, right? Because in the US, we would never just walk into the street against the light. You wait. You stand there like a good, law-abiding citizen. But then, a sweet 80-year-old British grandmother with a shopping trolley just waltzes right past you, steps directly into the street, and crosses the road while the light is red. And a police officer is standing right there on the corner, drinking a coffee, and he does absolutely nothing. I was literally shocked. I gasped. In my head, I was waiting for the officer to write her a massive ticket. But in England, jaywalking does not exist. It is not a crime. It is not even a legal concept. It is completely 100% legal to cross the street wherever you want, whenever you want. Also, if you want more than the public version of these videos, join the membership below. You'll get the deeper stories, the extra context, and the more unfiltered version of me that doesn't always make it into the main uploads. Now, when I tell my friends back in the States about this, their immediate counter-argument is always, well, Olivia, that sounds incredibly dangerous. Jaywalking laws keep us safe from getting run over. But here is the historical truth, and this is going to blow your mind. Jaywalking was completely invented by the American automobile industry in the 1920s. Before cars took over, American streets were chaotic, public spaces, kids played in them, vendors sold food in them, and pedestrians walked wherever they pleased. When cars first started showing up, they were killing pedestrians at an alarming rate, and the public was outraged. People wanted to ban cars from city centers. So what did the massive US auto companies like Ford and Packard do? They orchestrated one of the most successful psychological PR campaigns in human history. They coined the term jaywalker. Back in the 20s, a jay was a derogatory slang word for a country bumpkin, an idiot, a hillbilly who didn't know how to navigate the big city. The auto industry actively lobbied local governments to pass laws criminalizing pedestrians for walking in the street, and they ran massive public shaming campaigns to make it socially embarrassing to be a jaywalker. They legally stole the streets from human beings and gave them to machines, but in the UK, that never happened. The psychological analysis here is fascinating. The British fundamentally believe that the physical space of the country belongs to the people, not to the cars. In fact, the UK Highway Code was recently updated to establish a strict hierarchy of road users, placing pedestrians at the absolute top. If a pedestrian steps into the road at a junction, the car legally has to stop for them. In America, our laws prioritize the smooth, uninterrupted flow of commerce and vehicular traffic above human life. We have internalized this so deeply that we literally feel guilty. We feel a spike of adrenaline and fear if we cross an empty street outside of two white painted lines. The British just use their common sense. If a massive metal box is coming toward you, you don't step out. If the road is clear, you cross. It is the ultimate expression of treating adults like adults. And honestly, the freedom of just crossing the street without looking for a cop is intoxicating. But speaking of intoxicating, let us pivot to something that gave me an actual full-body panic attack, my first summer living in London. I want you to imagine it is a gorgeous, sunny Saturday in July. I am walking through St. James's Park right near Buckingham Palace. I look over onto the grass and I see a group of people having a picnic. But they aren't just drinking sodas. They have full glass bottles of Prosecco, cans of Stella Artois, and open bottles of wine. And they are just sitting there in a public park in broad daylight consuming alcohol. I immediately froze. My American brain started screaming, "Open container! Public intoxication! Where is the brown paper bag?" I was looking around frantically, waiting for the Metropolitan Police to ride in on horses and arrest these people, because in the US we would never, unless you are in exactly two places, New Orleans or Las Vegas, walking around outside with an open alcoholic beverage is a fast track to a hefty fine or a night in a jail cell. Very fast side note, most of the people watching this channel, literally around 87%, are not subscribed. So if you enjoy these little cultural deep dives and want more videos like this, subscribe now. It genuinely helps and it means you won't miss the next one. Americans are shocked this isn't illegal in England. It is entirely legal to drink in public here. You can walk down the sidewalk drinking a beer. You can sit on a park bench with a gin and tonic. You can literally stand outside of a pub. Because British pubs are so small, the crowds always spill out onto the pavement and drink your pint on the street. Now, why is this legal here and so heavily criminalized in the United States? The historical context is deeply rooted in America's puritanical origins and our very complicated relationship with morality. You have to remember the United States literally constitutionally banned alcohol during Prohibition in the 1920s. We viewed, and structurally still do view, alcohol consumption as an inherent moral failing that needs to be heavily controlled, hidden, and regulated by the state. When Prohibition was repealed, the temperance movement still had a massive cultural grip, so local governments created open container laws to keep the vice of drinking out of the public eye. It led to the absurd American phenomenon of drinking beer out of a brown paper bag. Think about how crazy that is from a psychological standpoint. The police know it is beer, you know it is beer, but as long as it is hidden behind a thin piece of brown paper, American society pretends it isn't happening. It is a culture of denial. In the UK, the culture surrounding alcohol is completely different. The pub is the historical centre of the community. It is where you go to meet your neighbours, commiserate about the terrible weather, and socialise. Alcohol is viewed as a social lubricant, not a moral hazard. The legal structure reflects this. In England and Wales, there is no blanket national law making it illegal to drink in public. Local councils can issue what are called Public Space Protection Orders, or PSPOs, to stop people from drinking, but these are specifically designed to target antisocial behaviour, violence, or severe public nuisance. They are not designed to punish a couple splitting a bottle of Pinot Grigio on a picnic blanket. The British legal system generally operates on the principle that unless you are actively causing a problem, the government is going to leave you alone. Living here, I have realised that American open container laws don't actually stop public drunkenness. They just criminalise poverty and disproportionately target marginalised groups who don't have private backyards to drink in. Experiencing the relaxed, communal joy of a British beer garden spilling out onto the street made me realise how uniquely stressful American drinking culture actually is. And while we are deeply on the topic of alcohol, I have to tell you about an experience that absolutely shattered my American perception of parenting and the law. I was literally shocked when I saw this. I was at a gorgeous traditional country pub in the countryside having a Sunday roast. The table next to me is a family. Mom, Dad, a younger daughter, and a teenage boy who looked like he was maybe 16 years old, an absolute baby face. The waiter comes over and the 16-year-old boy orders a pint of hard apple cider, and the waiter just writes it down, and the parents just smile, and then the waiter brings him the alcohol and he drinks it in front of his parents. I almost dropped my Yorkshire pudding. My internal monologue was screaming, "Call Child Protective Services. This establishment is going to lose its liquor license. That child is committing a federal crime." Because here is the truth. In the US, the age of 21 is treated as an absolute, untouchable, sacred boundary. If a restaurant in the US served a 16-year-old a beer, the establishment would be heavily fined, shut down, and the server might literally face criminal charges. But in England, it is completely legal. Let me explain the exact legal details because Americans never believe me when I tell them this. Yes, the legal age to purchase alcohol in the UK is 18. However, if you are 16 or 17 years old, it is entirely legal for you to consume beer, wine, or cider in a pub, restaurant, or hotel, as long as it is bought for you by an adult and it is consumed with a meal. Let's do a deep psychological analysis of why this exists, because the counter-arguments from Americans are always explosive. Americans will say, that is child endangerment. You are breeding a nation of alcoholics. But actually, the opposite is true, and it goes back to how we legislate human behavior. In the United States, our strict 21 drinking age was forced into existence in 1984 through the National Minimum Drinking Age Act. And the federal government didn't even pass a law making it illegal. They essentially blackmailed the states. They told every state in America, if you do not raise your drinking age to 21, we will withhold millions of dollars in federal highway funding. This was largely driven by pressure from lobbyist groups like Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Now, the intention was good, stopping drunk driving fatalities, but the psychological outcome on American youth was disastrous. By completely forbidding alcohol until 21, the US turned drinking into the ultimate forbidden fruit. We created an underground culture of fake IDs, basement frat parties, and dangerous unsupervised binge drinking. When American kids finally get to college at 18, they have no idea how to handle alcohol, so they drink a bottle of cheap vodka in a dorm room closet before the police show up. The British approach is infinitely healthier. By allowing 16-year-olds to have a single pint of beer or a glass of wine with their family over a meal, they are demystifying alcohol. They are legally and culturally teaching teenagers how to consume alcohol responsibly, slowly, and alongside food in a supervised environment. The taboo is completely stripped away. A pint of cider isn't an act of rebellion, it is just a beverage you have with your roast beef. It is astonishing to realize that American laws, which claim to protect children, actually force them into much more dangerous hidden behaviors, while British laws, which look reckless to an American, actually foster moderation. Now, if you thought the pub rules were wild, we need to talk about what happens when you step out of the pub and go for a walk in the English countryside. Because what I am about to tell you feels like the ultimate violation of the American dream. I love hiking, and shortly after I moved here, I downloaded a hiking app and went out to the Cotswolds. I am following the GPS trail on my phone, and the little blue dot tells me to turn left. I look left, and there is a wooden fence, a gate, a massive field full of grazing sheep, and a giant stone farmhouse. Clearly, undeniably, someone's private property. I looked at my phone, I looked at the field. I thought, well, the app is broken. I can't go that way. I will literally be shot. In the US, we would never ever step foot on someone else's land without explicit permission. Private property in America is practically a religion. We have the castle doctrine. We have no trespassing signs plastered on every tree. We have people legally armed to the teeth, fully within their rights to use lethal force to protect their acreage from intruders. The concept of wandering into a farmer's field in Texas or Ohio is basically a death wish, but I stood there in the Cotswolds, paralyzed, until a group of older British hikers came up behind me. They didn't even pause. They unlatched the farmer's gate, walked right into the field, marched past the sheep, and waved at the farmer who was on his tractor. The farmer waved back. I was literally shocked. I hurried after them and asked if we were trespassing. They looked at me like I was insane and said, "No, dear, this is a public footpath." Here is the legal and historical reality that shatters the American brain. England has a legally protected network of over 140,000 miles of public rights-of-way. These are ancient paths, some dating back literally thousands of years to the Roman occupation or the Middle Ages. Long before cars or modern roads existed, these paths were how ordinary people walked to church, to the market, or to the next village. And under British law, just because a wealthy landowner buys the estate, they do not have the right to block the historic path. The land may technically belong to the farmer, but the right of passage belongs to the public forever. In 1949, this was codified into modern law with the National Parks and Access to the Countryside Act, largely as a result of decades of working-class protests. The most famous was the Kinder Scout mass trespass of 1932, where hundreds of factory workers deliberately trespassed onto wealthy aristocratic land to demand their right to enjoy the natural beauty of their own country. The psychological difference here is staggering. In America, we view land primarily as a commodity. It is a financial asset. It is yours, and yours alone, to put a fence around and exclude the rest of humanity from. Extreme individualism is baked into our soil. But in the UK, while private property absolutely exists, there is a competing, equally powerful cultural belief that the landscape, the physical geography of Britain, is a shared national heritage. Landowners have a legal duty to maintain these footpaths and ensure the public can cross their land safely. You can literally walk across massive private estates, through farmers' crops, and right past grazing livestock, and it is completely legal. The sense of freedom this gives you, the feeling of being connected to the land rather than locked out of it by billionaires with barbed wire, is something I will never ever get over. It makes America feel incredibly restrictive by comparison. And speaking of feeling restricted in America, let's transition from the great outdoors to sitting on your couch watching television. Because the differences in broadcasting laws tell you everything you need to know about how our societies view adults. It was a Friday night. I was sitting in my living room in London drinking tea, and I turned on BBC One to watch The Graham Norton Show. It is a massive, mainstream national talk show. A major Hollywood actor was on the couch telling a story, and right in the middle of a sentence, he dropped a massive, fully enunciated F-bomb, and the show just kept going. The audio didn't cut out. Nobody's mouth was blurred. The host didn't apologize. They just laughed and moved on. I nearly choked on my tea. I checked the time. It was 10:45 p.m. In the US, we would never hear that on a major broadcast network, ever. If you did, it would be a national scandal. Americans are shocked this isn't illegal in England because in the US, the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, rules network television with an iron fist. Do you remember when Janet Jackson had a wardrobe malfunction at the Super Bowl for half a second? The broadcaster was fined over $500,000, and it sparked a literal congressional investigation. American broadcast laws operate on the psychological assumption that television must be completely sanitized and safe for a 5-year-old child, no matter what time of day or night it is. It is an extension of that same puritanical desire to enforce moral purity from the top down. If you want to hear someone swear on TV in America, you have to pay extra for premium cable like HBO, because apparently morality is tied to a subscription fee. But here is the legal structure in the UK. They have a regulatory body called Ofcom, and they operate on a legally mandated system called the watershed. The watershed occurs exactly at 9 p.m. every single night. Before 9 p.m., television and radio must be family-friendly, no extreme violence, no heavy sexual content, and absolutely no swearing. But the second the clock strikes 9 p.m., the watershed breaks, the legal assumption shifts completely. The British law essentially says, okay, it is 9 p.m., the children should be in bed, the adults are now watching television, and adults use adult words, and adults want to watch adult themes. So they allow swearing, they allow nudity, they allow graphic violence in dramas. The counter-argument from Americans is always, but what if a child stays up late and hears a bad word? The British psychological response is brilliant. That is the parent's responsibility, not the government's. The UK system respects the role of the parent to parent their own children, rather than forcing the entire country to consume media scrubbed clean to a kindergarten level. It is so deeply refreshing to be treated like an adult by your own television set. When I go back to the US now and watch late-night talk shows at midnight and the audio drops out every time a comedian gets passionate and swears, it feels so childish. It feels like I am being supervised by a strict school principal. England trusts its citizens to manage their own ears. Now I want to bring this all home with something that isn't just about fun or walking or TV. I want to talk about something that affects your actual livelihood. Something that feels so illegal to Americans that when I first experienced it in the UK workplace, I literally thought my colleague was going to be fired on the spot. We need to talk about taking time off. I was working in an office in London. It was the middle of July. One of my British co-workers stands up in the middle of our team meeting and casually announces, "Right then, I'm off to Spain for a bit. See you all in September." And she just logged off. I pulled my manager aside in a panic. I asked, "Did she quit? Is she having a medical emergency? What is going on?" My manager looked at me, totally confused, and said, "No, Olivia, she's just taking her summer holiday. She's taking 4 weeks off." I was literally shocked. In my American corporate brain, taking 4 consecutive weeks off from a job is equivalent to professional suicide. It felt illegal. In the US, we have what is called at-will employment, which essentially means your employer can fire you at any time, for almost any reason, with zero notice. Because of this terrifying lack of job security, Americans have developed a deeply toxic psychological relationship with work, famously known as hustle culture. We wear our exhaustion like a badge of honor. In America, there is absolutely zero federal legal requirement for paid time off. None, 0 days. If you get a job that offers you 10 days of paid vacation a year, you are considered incredibly lucky. And even then, Americans leave millions of vacation days unused every year because we are terrified that if we take a week off, we will look easily replaceable, or our boss will think we aren't dedicated enough. We even feel guilty calling in sick when we have a fever. We drag ourselves into the office, coughing and miserable, to prove our loyalty to a corporation that would replace us in a week if we drop dead. Here is the truth about the legal structure in the UK. By law, every single full-time employee in the United Kingdom is legally entitled to 28 days of paid annual leave. Let me repeat that. 28 days, almost 6 weeks of paid vacation, mandated by the government. And it is not viewed as a luxury. It is viewed as a fundamental human right. The historical context for this goes back to strong labour movements in Europe after World War II, where unions successfully argued that rest, leisure, and spending time with your family are essential for human dignity. When my British co-worker took a month off to go to Spain, nobody judged her, nobody thought she was slacking. Her work was simply covered by the rest of the team because they all knew that when it was their turn to take 3 weeks off to go to Italy or Cornwall, she would cover for them. The psychological difference is profound. Americans live to work. Our entire identity, our health insurance, our social standing is tied directly to our employment. We are terrified of our bosses. The British work to live. They view their job as an economic transaction that funds their actual life, their time at the pub, their walks on the public footpaths, their time with their families. The fact that it feels illegal to an American to step away from their desk for 3 weeks without checking their email is actually a tragic reflection of how completely we have surrendered our personal time to corporate interests. Living in England and being forced to take my vacation days. Yes, forced, because British HR departments will literally chase you down and make you take your time off before the end of the year so they don't violate labour laws, has completely rewired my brain. It is a bizarre and beautiful thing, realizing that the rules you grew up with aren't the universal default. The United States loves to market itself as the land of the free, the absolute pinnacle of liberty. But when you actually live abroad, you start to realize that American freedom is often highly conditional. It is the freedom for corporations to restrict your vacation, the freedom for the auto industry to kick you off the streets, and the freedom to hide your beer in a brown paper bag. Coming to England, a place with a literal monarchy and centuries of class-based history, I honestly expected it to feel stuffy and restrictive. Instead, I found a society where I can cross the street when it is safe, walk through a beautiful farmer's field on a Sunday, have a glass of wine in a park without fear of the police, and turn my computer off for a month without losing my career. Americans are shocked these things aren't illegal in England, but the real shock is waking up and wondering why they are still illegal back home. See you next time.